What's the most edgy, scary thing one could say as a politician or a political figure of any sort? The one thing you're not allowed to be that could end your career. I think we can all agree that that would be saying something racist or being a racist. Anything touching on the subject of white identity politics is the biggest no-no of all. Remember the alt-right? Don't want to appear to be one of them. That's clearly something that's just fringe, right? White identity is an untouchable subject. Well, apparently not anymore.
That's right. You're not Hitler. You're not a Nazi. You don't deserve to be called that and demonized.
Well,
they come from Africa. They come from Asia. They come from South America. They dump them on the border and they pour into our country.
The result is a country, our country, that is changing faster than it ever has. And it's fueled by anti-white racial hostility.
So many prominent popular figures as of late are now mirroring alt-right talking points that were once condemned.
That the great replacement theory is not some grand right-wing conspiracy theory, but a basic statement of the Democratic Party's platform.
I also think a lot of people, especially white Christians, they're resisting identity politics. They don't want to go to that next step, but that's where it's heading.
And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way.
It's going there quickly. I mean, white identitarianism is going to happen, and they want it to happen.
They're creating it, and they're not only encouraging it, they're guaranteeing its emergence.
At this point, we're at a really interesting stage where we have people like Matt Walsh or Charlie Kirk and even Tucker Carlson starting to talk about white identity. A couple years ago, you see Matt Walsh saying that white identity is not an issue.
Hi, Matt. My question is, do you think that modern American society has an anti-white bias?
Anti-white bias? No, I don't think it comes down to race. I think, as I said, I think it comes down mainly to ideas.
But clearly now, his perspective has changed quite a bit.
They want other racial groups to have a sense of community, a sense of identity and belonging within the group. They want those groups to advocate for themselves. They want those groups to be concerned with the flourishing of their groups. But they stridently oppose any similar move for whites to do that as well, because they do not want whites to see themselves as a group. At bottom, they don't want whites to have a racial identity, and they will tell you this.
And like Matt Walsh, Charlie Kirk was once someone who also shied away from identity politics. Until now. Well, unless it comes to Israel. In any case, that changed recently with this discussion that was had regarding the topic, in which they talked about identity politics being inevitable. And in this, we noticed some very interesting things going on. That not everybody here had the same opinion regarding their feelings about the inevitable rise of white identitarianism. Tucker taking the most issue of anyone, it seems.
I also think a lot of people, especially white Christians, they're resisting identity politics. They don't want to go to that next step, but that's where it's heading. I mean, it's going there quickly. I mean, white identitarianism is going to happen, and they want it to happen.
They're creating it, and I speak for myself as someone who's 54 and grew up in a totally different country. I don't want to identify as white. I don't even like thinking about that stuff. I like thinking about how people really are. I don't like thinking of them as members of groups.
He has, obviously, a different sentiment towards this. He sort of believes that, well, it's the left who's causing this to happen, and that's this unfortunate thing that we kind of wish never really happened. Someone like Tucker Carlson seems to believe that Martin Luther King colorblindness, being an individualist, that these are things that Tucker wants to maintain.
I will say this, if I can just make one prediction. So the United States is becoming non-white. Whites are going to be in the minority. So what that means soon. So what that means is you're going to get at some point, probably in my lifetime, people standing up and saying, I represent white people. I'm the candidate of the white voter. Right. And I just want to say on the record that I'm going to tell that person to fuck off. Nobody speaks for me because he shares the same skin color as me. Like, I just reject that entire idea. If I agree with you, I'll let you speak for me. And if I don't, I won't. But this idea.
But the thing that you'll notice in his ambivalence towards it, in his uneasiness, is that he seems to feel that this is a bad thing. Wouldn't you say that he feels that way because the left has made an argument that we, people of European descent, if we were to have an identity, that in and of itself would be something that was wrong? Because that's kind of what he's suggesting.
If you ask, for example, why black pride and brown pride are okay, more than okay, they're actively good, but white pride is horrendously racist, they will inform you that whites have no real racial identity. The category is too broad and vague. Thus, they argue white pride must really be an expression of hatred towards non-whites. I mean, you can't have white pride. It doesn't make any sense, they say, because it's a group that doesn't mean anything. They will simply expect you not to notice that black and brown are categories just as broad, just as vague as white. Doesn't matter. Black and brown can and should have a sense of racial identity. White must not. I mean, that's the rule. Because to do the same would be to acknowledge the existence of white people as a group and to give that group permission to care about its own well-being.
Every group of people does this, except for us. And so, while I do understand Tucker's position, I also want to point out that it's just not something that is realistic. It isn't realistic to be an individualist, to be colorblind, because no one else but us is willing to do this. What Tucker is failing to understand is how our current system is anything but fair, in particular to us. When other people come to America, for instance, are they changing? No, that's clearly not the trend. Our issue is that they're bringing their cultures with them, and that's causing all sorts of issues, all sorts of division. Them adapting to us and our ways of life would require them to become like us, which means losing their identity in the process. As this country, at its inception, was created by people of European descent. So these values that Americans hold, that Tucker values, that we ask non-European foreigners to embrace when they come here, well, it's just that. It's foreign to them. What Tucker doesn't realize is that he too is playing the game of identity politics, but is just not realizing it yet. These values that he cherishes, that he expects them to take on when they come to our countries, are inherently European by their very nature, which is exactly why leftists and the foreigners who are coming here are both so adamant that we change all of our rules and our way of life to adapt to their way of life, which is why they believe that our institutions and our values are racist. And that's because they are acknowledging correctly that these are our values. Whether you like it or not, you're going to be associated to being a European, to being a white person, for better or for worse. And what else is unrealistic in a denial of reality is not acknowledging group identities. Refusing to acknowledge this cuts one off from understanding others' motivations and intentions. And with this in mind, for example, one can see that The world is a competition. The way that humans have interacted throughout human history has always been very competitive. Humans have always battled with each other, have vied for power, and now we're suddenly going to say that this isn't something that's happening, that we can just pretend like that just all ended because Martin Luther King gave a speech, because there's this project of globalism. Another argument that people like Tucker, or what Tucker's position will make, is that this country has always been open to everybody. But that's really not true. You know, someone like Tucker really values the founding fathers of this country. He really wants to maintain what he feels is the origins, the sets of ideas that really make America what they are. But the truth is that America was not a country that allowed anyone into its borders. There are so many naturalization acts that pertain to immigration, like the Act of 1790. These immigration policies throughout our history have maintained that we don't let just anybody in. This idea that our country has always been open to everybody is not true. The people who came to this country wanted people of European stock to be able to immigrate here. It was a European colony. This idea that we've all been fed, that this country has always been open to any immigrant across the entire world, is just false. A lot of the misconceptions around this idea are due to the Hart-Sellers Act, as that was an act that was passed that dramatically changed the demographics of our country into what it is today, overturning preference towards Europeans, in particular Western Europeans. And so given this, the values and the foundation of our country really are anchored in our identity as Europeans. So when Tucker is speaking to an American mindset, an American way of life, or an American, what is he speaking to exactly? What does that mean? What does that entail? Is that not a group? And it's clear that Tucker isn't against or isn't opposed to identity politics, because he's not opposed to speaking for groups. He has no issue speaking for the American people or wanting to do that, but specifically doesn't want to speak on behalf of people of European descent. And furthermore, maybe there's something that Tucker ultimately doesn't realize that he's doing that has many sinister connotations that he may unknowingly be taking part in. Is Tucker leaning into the left, into their argument that white people are inherently evil? Why is it not possible for someone of European descent to embrace beautiful and life-affirming, positive aspects of their identity? Why is it the case that if we want to embrace our identity, like all other groups of people want to do, that suddenly we're not allowed to do that because it's inherently evil? That it's not possible that we could positively engage in our identity? Stretching back in history, looking at who it is that we've been throughout the ages, there are so many beautiful aspects of our identity. Up until this point, we've sort of decided, well, this wasn't any good, that this was all evil. We're told that every aspect of our identity is somehow corrupted or will lead to some sort of horrible set of events. And that couldn't be more untrue. Are people of European descent inherently evil? That's obviously a ridiculous idea. That if we have this identity, that somehow this leads to violence and oppression of other people. Why is that the case? Why is it evil in particular for someone of European descent a white person to love their group, to have an inward preference. Because every other group of people has that, but for some reason we're barred from doing so. When we look at history, or at least what we're told, is that we cannot have an identity, that it's evil for us to have one. I know that people like Tucker feel a sense of shame in embracing their identity, but the reason why we should embrace our identity in a healthy way is because of what it's worth. And I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to the people that we love if we don't take a stand and try to protect what our ancestors ultimately gifted to us. I think what's more shameful than anything else is not taking up your responsibility to your family, to your extended family, which is your people, and protecting and embracing what it is that has been built over the centuries. I think one should feel shame for letting that slip through their fingers so carelessly. But not only this, but looking at what's going on from a different perspective is key here. That all of these people flooding into our countries and asking that we shape ourselves to their way of life and become like them reveals that the system that we're a part of is undignifying to us. And that ultimately that seems to be its aim, that liberalism and this whole political system in general, it seems, is not humanitarian, not all-inclusive, because it excludes us, the people who created these countries that everybody's flooding into. That the people who created so much prosperity are really the ones that are being tarnished the most. And so at the end of the day, I think Tucker's dilemma, his identity crisis, well, for one, he has to realize that all of politics is identity politics at the end of the day, and that he's playing that game whether he thinks so or not, and that there really isn't any other option but to take responsibility and be willing to stand up for yourself, because at the end of the day, everyone else is standing up for themselves and standing together except for us. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in checking out another video, check out the Arctos Substack, in which I discuss how the alt-right and its culture led to these popular figures ultimately coming to terms with identity politics. So if you're interested, head over there and sign up to their Substack to get not only access to this video, but access to a bunch of other great content.